I'll be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, families back home in Texas are planning their Thanksgiving menus, but they're also bracing for steep grocery bills. Prices are up for just about every part of a typical Thanksgiving meal. The cost of frozen turkey is the highest in history. Things like potatoes, butter, pumpkin pies, even salt cost more than they did a year ago. It's not just going to cost more to eat, it's going to cost more to cook. Appliance prices have skyrocketed over the past year, as have electricity bills. And family members will have to pay a lot more just to visit their friends and relatives, because gas prices are up 60% from last year. As families are being pummeled by higher prices and inflation, our Democratic colleagues are planning to hand major savings to a select group of Americans, just not the ones you think, and certainly not the ones who need the help. Despite their cries of taxing the rich, Democrats are plotting an absolutely massive handout to the wealthiest Americans. This windfall is not distributed through stimulus checks or lower tax rates. That would be far too obvious. Instead, our Democratic colleagues are relying on a range of gimmicky sunsets and expirations to dole out the millionaire tax break. If they thought no one would notice, well, they would be wrong. For example, the Washington Post headline says it all. It says the second biggest program in the Democratic spending plan gives billions to the rich. That's not how our colleagues have tried to brand their legislation. They would portray themselves as modern-day Robin Hoods, stealing from the rich to give to the poor. Strange that it's really just the opposite. They talk about the wealthy paying their fair share and giving working families free programs. But the reality of the situation is far different from the picture they paint, and the wealthiest Americans stand to reap big benefits under this legislation. For example, Democrats have included a provision that will allow millionaires and billionaires in blue states to pay less in federal taxes. As the headline notes, this handout comes with a big price tag, $285 billion in tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans. It's more expensive than the clean energy and climate provisions in their bill, more expensive than paid family leave, more expensive than the combined cost of the child tax credit and home-based services. And there's no denying that the beneficiaries of this ultra-expensive provision are the wealthiest Americans. According to the Tax Policy Center, about 70% of the benefit goes to the top 5% of wage earners. 70% goes to the top 5%. That is, people making more than $366,000 a year, roughly 6 times the median household income of Texans. We're not talking about saving a few dollars here and there. The top 1% would save an average of $14,900 next year, and the bottom 40% of taxpayers wouldn't be given a dime's worth of a break in their taxes. The rich in America who stand to gain the most from this change are those who live in blue states like New York and California that have higher state and local taxes. They would, under this legislation, get to deduct up to $80,000 in their state and local taxes from next year's federal tax return, leaving everybody else to fill up the gap. Working families in Texas should not have to subsidize the tax bill for Manhattan millionaires. If the wealthiest people in New York or California think their state and local taxes are too high, there's a pretty simple solution. Tell your elected officials to cut taxes. Or you can do like many people are doing these days, vote with your feet and move to places like Texas. Over the last decade, Californians have flocked to my state by the hundreds of thousands. People do vote with their feet, and they clearly support what we are doing in Texas. We've been happy to welcome folks from all around the country who are in search of lower taxes, affordable homes, and a better standard of living. Blue state millionaires can't expect my constituents to subsidize their tax bills. They need to either pay their taxes or maybe they need to decide to move to some place where they're not taxed at such a high rate. Under this bill, 2/3 of those making more than $1 million will receive a tax cut next year. Let me say that again. The vast majority of millionaires will, under the Democratic legislation, receive a tax break, and nearly 90% of those earning between $500,000 and $1 million will receive a tax cut. This is a sharp contrast from how middle-class working families are treated. Less than 1/3 of those earning between $20,000 and $100,000 a year will receive a significant tax cut. And the following year, 2023, those savings dramatically decrease. Year over year, the tax provisions in this bill change dramatically. In fact, there's not a single year over the next decade in which each tax provision will be used at the same time. Democrats aren't rewriting the tax code to make millionaires pay their fair share. They're gaming it to create the illusion of fairness. Some programs begin immediately and end after 1 year. Some don't even take effect for a couple of years. These are plain budgetary gimmicks. After all, they can't afford to give billionaires a tax break and dole out increased social welfare programs. But the fact of the matter is the millionaire tax break in their legislation is the largest handout for wealthy Americans. But it's not the only one in the bill. This legislation would allow people earning hundreds of thousands of dollars to receive up to $12,500 from the taxpayers if they buy an electric vehicle. They also can receive up to $900 to purchase an e-bike, which is obviously less green than a good old-fashioned regular bike. The Democrats' reckless tax and spending bill also creates handouts for union bosses, trial lawyers, wealthy media corporations, and a host of powerful friends of the Democratic Party. All of these handouts may appease some of our colleagues' wealthiest supporters, but it will only make life harder for working families. Families earning just over the median household income, which is just under $62,000 in Texas, could see their child care costs soar by as much as $13,000. And the climate policies in this bill are sure to drive energy prices even higher. Gasoline already costs 60% more today than it did a year ago. That's a combination of inflation and the policies of this administration, which attack the very energy industry that we depend upon to provide affordable energy. If the Democrats manage to get this grab bag of radical climate policies signed into law, prices at the pump will go even higher. So this bill will not, as advertised, help America to build back better. It will ensure that we never reach the pre-pandemic recovery that was the envy of the world. No public relations campaign can hide the truth about this bill. This is a reckless tax and spending spree that will benefit the wealthiest of Americans at the cost of working families. The last thing we need to do is to line the pockets of wealthy Americans while driving up the cost of the middle class. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I would note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.